just by degree. I think it's a good point, Wave.
Well, this was back in the 80s. So over the years, what I've come to see is that
I think we're back on it. I
Is
think
Jim on
Jim wants to talk.
the
I think Jim wants to talk now. Sorry.
the orb allowance has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. I can allow for much bigger orbs than I used to.
Jim, test your mic, say again.
But in terms of the midheaven, it's within a degree or a degree and a half, something like that, on both of them.
Yeah.
Can
Can you see me now?
Yes.
Yay.
We can, as long as you hold your mic a little closer.
Good. Okay.
Take
Always
two.
fun the first time.
Your audio is a little soft, Jim.
You always remember your first time, don't you?
Uh,
Yeah. First time you drive a car, first time you get school.
I'm glad that was a dad joke.
Bad dad joke. Yes.
I was like, thank God that was clean.
Hey,
Okay,
Jim,
so
we need you to talk from the diaphragm.
we
Yeah,
are
your
going to-
mic.
That-
You have
Okay,
to.
deteriorate. We're gonna go back in.
Oh, yeah, but I called back and I got it.
Recording of where.
I called back and I made my, yeah, it was really bad connection and.
Oh, there it is. That funny green thing. Here we go.
We can
All right.
And
barely hear you, Jim.
Tried to do it
Little
automatically.
reminder for everybody else to mute if you're not actively talking.
Couldn't hear.
Yeah, everybody else should
I
mute. So we
tried again, and I paid it or
see.
automatic one the second time.
So you can hear me now?
Thank you for
Yes.
checking.
Yeah.
And you see the screen, the astronomy of Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
All right, here we go. Back to Spencer.
Yeah, okay, I was talking about.
We can't hear Spencer.
Can't hear you. Here you go. Come on.
You've got to put the mic really close.
Don't be shy.
I have all my notes.
Jim or Spencer or somebody, if you have, whoever has control of the Zoom, you can mute us all so that we aren't, hearing background noise and interrupting
Okay, let me,
if we don't do it individually.
yeah, hang on. Let me see if I can do this an easy way. Yeah. I can get that way.
Everybody's self-muted.
Okay, yeah, everybody mute yourselves, please. Just to make life easy for me. Here we go, there's a mute all button. Hopefully that won't mute me. There we go. Yes, we're muting everybody. Can you still hear us? Sandra, say something.
Hello, how are you?
Yep.
Hi, thank you.
Can hear you.
Okay, great. So we're ready to go?
Yep.
I want to point out one of the things about how powerful Jupiter is. It occurred to me when I was in high school, I had enough money to buy a rather cheap telescope. And at the first time I took this telescope and pointed it at Jupiter, 4 moons are visible with a very weak telescope. And when I first saw it, it looked like a sun with planets, and I nearly fainted. And so when you think of the strength of this planet, realize that it has moons that are so powerful, you can see them with an inexpensive telescope. And if you haven't done that, I really think you ought to do it, because it's going to really emphasize the power and the strength of this planet, that it has moons that you can actually see. And that's all I have right now. I have a lot more later. But
Okay. Yeah, and if you don't want to go out and get your own telescope, or you could try some, I don't know if binoculars would work, but they're good ones, you might. Look for like a local observatory or something. Sometimes local colleges will have a small one. Okay.
The Griffith Observatory has times when amateur astrologers will go up, and there's a lot of telescopes up there, and they'll share them.
Yeah, that's.
You just go on their site and find out when they're doing that.
I have lived here since 1988, no, 89, and I still haven't gone there. Shame on me. Okay. Yes, I know I have to go. All right. Excuse me. All right, moving along. And come on. Let's try that. Come on. There we go. All right, some brief mythology. Jupiter is Roman name. It was considered the king of the gods. Greek equivalent was Zeus. His consort was Juno. He was also considered the god of sky and lightning. Neptune, also the Roman name, considered the god of waters. Greek equivalent is Poseidon. Consort is Salacia. Neptune was discovered September 23rd, 24th, somewhere that night of 1846. And I had the discovery chart, and you'll see it's quite interesting. Pisces is Greek, symbolic of two fishes swimming in opposite directions. There's various myths about that. They represent the fish that brought Venus ashore after she was birthed in the ocean. Some of you may be familiar with the famous painting by Botticelli, Venus Rising. See her in the foaming ocean coming in on a seashell, giant seashell. Another story was that it was two dolphins rescuing Venus and Eros from Typhon, who was a bad guy. Its sign is representative duality, the opposite direct, because the fish are swimming in opposite directions. So, anytime you're thinking of, well, everything is, there's a duality in everything in the universe. You've got opposite signs, the opposite houses, oppositions between the planets, all of which represent some element of duality. Okay, a little bit of the astrology of Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces. Jupiter is considered the greater benefic, making much of nothing. The symbol for Jupiter, which kind of looks like the number 4, actually represents the crescent of receptivity rising above the cross of matter. It's the ancient ruler of Sagittarius and Pisces. Now, in Rex Bill's book on rulerships, there are 13 pages devoted to things that Jupiter rules. And it rules things, everything from abscesses to certain types of writers. Some of the positive words I grabbed out of there, altars, advantages, attorneys, and whether that's positive or not, I'm not sure. Believe it or not, Jupiter is the ruler of the Republican Party, but that was the party of Lincoln, not the current party, I'm inclined to think. You got pride, benefactors, civilians, animals, apologies, institutions. Jupiter rules Jews, morality, expansion. Some of the challenges are excesses. Jupiter likes to expand things, but sometimes too much is too much. Snobbishness, fines, gambling, inflation, misjudgments, gluttony, enlargement, jaundice, self-indulgence, speculation, vanity. And you may notice that some of the keywords for Jupiter also seem to correlate with Neptune and also with Pisces. So Neptune, breaking down borders and barriers. The symbol for Neptune represents the trident, but you also have the crescent pointing to the sky, symbolizing spiritual receptivity, over the cross of matter, symbolizing the soul's desire to break away from the constraints of reality. As I had mentioned, Neptune crosses each degree 3 times. This slideshow will be downloaded to the, or downloaded to the our Facebook page as a PDF, so anybody that wants it can get it there, or you can email me and I will send it to you. And yes, I owe people some from the last month, but I got to make a couple of fixes to make on the last one. So, so here's the discovery chart for Neptune. The key here is that Neptune and Saturn were at 25 Aquarius. Sabian symbol for 25 Aquarius, which is technically the 26th degree of Aquarius, is a hydrometer. So who knows what a hydrometer is? Yeah, it has to do with, it's an instrument used to measure the relative density of liquids. It's a very ancient one. Archimedes, 3rd century BC, had one. He made it, they're not sure if he invented it or not, but yeah. So that's the key thing to keep in mind, is that when Neptune was discovered, it was conjunct Saturn. And that may have made it easier to see. But it was the first planet that was calculated to exist and then actually discovered. They had done calculations, they figured there's another large body out there somewhere. They just needed to find it. Now imagine in 1846, you're looking for another planet and you don't have the ability to take pictures of, you can use photographic plates so you can take pictures over a series of nights and see if something's moving. Takes patience. Great. Pisces. Symbol of Pisces represents the two fish connected at their centers, swimming in opposite directions. It's the resolution of opposites. There are over 4 pages in Rex Bill's book on rulerships devoted to Pisces. Go back. There are 16 pages for Jupiter. Where'd Neptune go? And there's, let's see what that's okay, over 13 pages for Jupiter, over 16 pages devoted to Neptune. And we get, again, there's just, 4 pages. By the time he gets to the signs, there's not as much. And you'll see a lot of overlap between the ruling planets and the signs. But things like abstract, chemistry, the intangible, poetry, sleep, sympathy, wells, water. Pisces rules everything from abbeys to X-rays. Conspiracies, the occult, limitations, which may or may not be a positive thing. That Mel Gibson movie, Conspiracy Theory, I think it was. I think it was with, who's that? Julia Roberts. He was a taxi driver and a bit of a conspiracy theory nut until he actually came up with one that actually was real. So that's something to watch out. It's like they say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean people are out to get you. Okay, so out to get you, yes. Whoop. All right, okay, stop there. Just some challenges that come with the Pisces are things like crime and gout and frauds and fog and treachery and chaos and workhouses and poetry, or poverty rather. Well, in some cases it could be poetry, yes. There's some bad poetry out there. Oh, Mitch McConnell? He a Pisces? Oh, all right then. Well, yeah, you can put some people in here. We know who, yeah. But we're not talking about Gemini right now, so. Okay, so here's the skivvy on prior Jupiter Neptune conjunctions in Pisces, going back, well, I started at 539 AD. I could have gone back farther, but I couldn't see a point to it. So the question is, what was happening in 539 AD? Their conjunction was initially, the first one was at 3 Pisces, 42. And then because of the retrograde and direct motion, they conjuncted again at 2 Pisces and then at 1 Pisces. 541 to 543 was the plague of Justinian. Estimated that, 100 million people died around the world. That was they believe, an early form of the bubonic plague. bubonic plague. Yeah, the Black Death. But it's called the plague of Justinian just because he was the yeah, he was the ruler, emperor at the time. Now on January 10th of 539 is when Neptune entered Pisces. And then it wasn't until May 5th of 552, over 13 years later, that Neptune left Pisces. Yeah, my point for including those dates is that the one thing that you can concretely predict with astrology is when something like that will happen. You can predict, you can tell exactly when Jupiter and Neptune will be conjunct in Pisces and where it will be. You can tell when Bob will have his Saturn return, or Nancy may have her Uranus opposition Uranus. Those things are given, and the only way they won't happen is if the individual doesn't live that long, or the world ends, in which case we don't need to worry about it. All those doomsayers were right. Ooh, that's fun. Okay, the next conjunction wasn't until January 5th of 706. That was at 7 Pisces. In 705, Justinian II recaptured Constantinople. February 706, he presided over the public humiliation of his foes and their execution. Neptune entered Pisces on December 13th of 702, left Pisces February 14th, happy Valentine's Day, 716. Our next conjunction was January 31st, 872 at 12 Pisces 58. Some of these degrees may be significant for some of you. The first hospital was built in Egypt. It's not the first Egyptian hospital, that is the first hospital. Harold Fairhair won a great naval victory, becoming the first king of Norway. And conflict raged throughout Great Britain, because at that time there were a lot of small kingdoms within Great Britain, and they were all fighting with each other, trying to gain control. This was the early days of the Viking invasions of Great Britain. So any of you who do DNA and genealogy and you think you're British heritage and you find you've got a lot of Scandinavian DNA in you, that's why. That's because a lot of them came from Scandinavia. So Neptune entered Pisces on January 30th of 876 and left on January 19th of 880. Our next conjunction is February 25th, 1038. It's at 18 Pisces 56. Notice each time the conjunction is a little bit further into Pisces. There were conflicts going on between the Italian states. Italy as a nation didn't exist. And it's a fairly new nation. Italy as a nation is actually younger than the United States. Bohemia invaded Poland. Yes, there was a Bohemian state at that point. January 8th of 1030 was when Neptune entered Pisces. March 5th of 1043, Neptune left Pisces. Our next conjunction comes up on March 22nd, 1204. And this is the approximate time of Robin Hood. But revolution, let's see, overthrows it was a revolution that overthrew the Byzantine emperor. Fourth Crusaders conquered and sacked Constantinople. Made a lot of friends amongst the Muslims by basically killing all of them, or most of them. The writings of French theologian Amalric were condemned by the Pope. Shame, shame. Let's see, February 13th, 1207, wrong date. Oh, I don't have the date at hand. Shame on me. But Neptune left Pisces on February 13th, 1207. I will have to fix that. December 25th, 1357. Our next conjunction. Now you'll notice that if you're doing the math, this one is shorter, comes up sooner. It's like 153 years and a half, not quite 154 years. That has to do with a whole lot of factors. Orbits. It's the one that is a little different than the others. Now, the first one that I mentioned was the only time that there was actually 3 conjunctions in Pisces. All the subsequent conjunctions in Pisces have been one-time events. They're singular events, which make them much, I think, more powerful, because this is it. You got one shot at it, dude. You know, it's kind of like a Saturn return. You may get one Saturn return, or with retrograde, you may get 3. Well, if you get 3, then you got time to work on that lesson and learn it. But if you only get 1, that's it. 1 and done. About 166 years, yeah. This one was a short one for some reason. We're getting there. Yeah. I wanted to lay the groundwork. Okay, so what's going on in 1357? Well, we have what's known as the 100 Years' War. How many of you remember that from history class? How many of you remember having a history class? Yeah, okay. That pretty well says that. The Sudanese royal family was massacred. Influenza was first identified as a disease. Keep that one in mind when it comes to pandemic time. And let's see, January 23rd, 1371 is when Neptune left Pisces. Oh, I'm going to fix these. Okay. Next one comes up January 20th, 1524. This one is at 6 Pisces 44. Notice that the 1557 one was at 0 Pisces. And one of the reasons it happened sooner was that the conjunction occurred earlier in Pisces. Okay, so 1520. In 1517, Martin Luther wrote his 95 Theses. 1519, he is excommunicated by the Pope. Be gone, Martin Luther. Then there was the Spanish conquistadors arrived in Mexico, also in 1519. By 1521, they have ransacked, pillaged, and pretty much conquered the Aztec Empire, stolen most of their gold, and killed most of the people with the introduced European diseases to which they had no natural immunity. Next up, February 21st, 1690 at 12 Pisces 29. There was something called the 9 Years' War, which I wasn't familiar with until I looked this up, which ran from 1688 to 1697. This was a European conflict between various countries and aligning either with or against France. France was kind of like going through a growing pains phase. They wanted to be they wanted to have the big boy pants, and never quite got there. Let's see, William III, King of England, dissolved Parliament, called for new elections. We had the Salem witch trials in 1692-93. And March 1st of 1698, Neptune left Pisces. All right, we're almost there. So the previous one, the next one is March 17th, 1856, which was the one before this one. Okay. It occurs at 1813 Pisces. This is like 10 years after, not even 9.5 years after Venus or Neptune was discovered. Okay. So, from 1839 to 1856 was what was known as the third cholera epidemic. Former President James K. Polk was one of hundreds of thousands of victims died from that cholera epidemic. There were several of them that occurred over the decades of the early to mid 1800s. 1853 to 1856 was the Crimean War. This was a war between Britain and some other allies of the Ottoman Empire against Russia. Because Russia wanted to annex all of the Crimea and other areas there so they could have access to the Black Sea. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Right on the nose, lady. Yes. And how many of you remember the famous poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, Charge of the Light Brigade? Right, that was yes. Yeah, that was during what was known as the Battle of Balaclava during the Crimean War. It was a blunder. The order that was supposed to be sent to the commander of the Light Brigade, some 600 horsemen, said to go over there and hold that position. But the message he got said, charge. And so they charged into the almost impenetrable position down the valley, cannon fire coming at them from every which way. They did get to the position at the end of the battery at the end, which they were able to hold briefly, but because there were so few of them left, they had to go back. It's an interesting poem. You might want to read it to give you a sense of British pride, I guess, British arrogance, and just some of the concepts of what is going on in the current conflict.
Isn't there a line like ours is not the question why?
But do or die, yes. Yep, that comes from Charge of the Light Brigade. Yeah, so you got all these guys sitting there, right? Really bad idea, Captain, but yeah.
Can I just say something about Jupiter and the fall of the axis?
Yeah.
I read in the library book once that the gold from the New World made possible the money economy of the Old World. So it was a huge factor.
It was huge. In fact, a lot of that gold didn't get there because the ships sank. They got caught in hurricanes and the like. I mean, there's all kinds of treasure ships along the coast of Florida. They're constantly finding gold and treasure down there. There's a new show that just started on cable TV, History Channel. I think it's about the Aztec gold, where it's based on the theory that, well, the Spanish didn't get all the gold. Montezuma saw them coming and read the writing on the wall and said, well, let's take some of the gold and we'll hide it someplace. So supposedly there's like 3 families looking for the gold, and they each know where it is, and it's all in 3 different places, of course. There's one looking in Utah, and one looking, I think, in Nevada, and the other was looking someplace in Arizona.
Jim,
Yes.
this is Rita.
Hi, Rita.
Hi. I'm looking at your dates here, and obviously the previous is 1859, and the next one is a long way off. I don't think we'll see it. But I was just wondering, you go from 1690 to 1859. At some point, not this time, but at some point, could you tell us astrologically what was going on for the formation of the United States? Because I just saw a 4-hour special of Benjamin Franklin by Ken Burns, and it was fabulous, of all the different, and maybe it might be interesting to go back and kind of see what major things were going on astrologically at that point.
Well, the main thing going on astrological when the United States declared their independence from Great Britain was the discovery of Uranus,
Oh.
from which Uranus gets a lot of his attributes of revolutionary. I love humanity, it's people I can't stand. That kind of stuff. So,
Can
yeah,
I say
that's the main
something?
thing that's
This
going
is
on.
Dale. Can I
Pardon?
say something? Yeah, and to read it, if you look at the Book of World Horoscopes by Nicholas Campion, the one thing I found interesting on the United States was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction was exactly, I don't remember if it was Saturn or Pluto now off the top of my head, but it was exactly the same degree on the meeting of the First Continental Congress, literally the basis. So if you have that book, take a look at it. It's really interesting.
Can you name the book again, please?
Yeah, the Book of World Horoscopes
Oh,
by Nicholas Campion.
okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Boy, it's coming up.
Oh.
We're giving it special. That's if they get special attention. Because
Oh.
that's why we're here today. Okay, what else is left? Okay, so Republican Party was founded in 1854. First presidential election with a Republican candidate was 1856. The candidate, John C. Fremont from California, was defeated by Democratic rival James Buchanan of Pennsylvania. October 16th, 1859, John Brown, the abolitionist, led a raid on the Harper's Ferry Arsenal, which did not end well for John and his followers. Then we have the American Civil War from April 12th of 1861 to May 9th of 1865. Neptune entered Pisces April 25th, 1847. It left on February 13th, 1862, shortly after getting the Civil War going. Obviously, there were other things going on after a while to do that would suggest the Civil War, but it's part of it. Now, the next one after this year's, the one this year is on Tuesday, this year one, right? Okay, is May 10th of 2188. We'll get back together here again then to talk about that one. At 29 Pisces 41. There's a mixed grand trine involving the moon in Scorpio and Pluto and Leo to the conjunction point. Mars is conjunct Algol on that chart. Neptune will enter Pisces on March 19th of 2175 and will exit January 1st of 2190. Okay, now let's get to today. Let's see. So here's the chart for the 1856 conjunction. You'll see the conjunction at 18 Pisces in the second house. This is based on a Washington, D.C. chart. Yes, I got that part right. Yippee, skippy. And let's see, the Sabian symbol is a master instructing his pupil. What's kind of going on in 1856? Education was becoming more common. Colleges and universities were opening up. Women were having more access to education, still not a lot. So we're given the same standing or credit, but it was happening. More and more people were learning to read and write. One of the things that I find fascinating, amongst other things, an amateur genealogist, I've been working on family tree, and the older census reports have a column to indicate whether the person can read and write or whether they attended school. And it's quite interesting how many people were in fact illiterate, even in the 1800s.
Right.
So yeah, so we have the spiritualist movement that started with the discovery of Neptune, mediumships and the like. So there's a lot of things that are going on, starting with the discovery of Neptune in 1846, that lead into this conjunction. Keep in mind, when Neptune was discovered, all you needed was a few calculations, and you would know then that on March 17th of 1856, Neptune would be conjunct Jupiter. All right, let's get to the.
One more comment.
Yes, go ahead.
Neptune also controls like chemical, things like that. I don't have a long comment.
Yeah. So the people that don't hear.
All right. Photography made an enormous jump during this period of time. This is the first war that had pictures taken of it that we can have in books. I have a couple of books on the Civil War, and it's got pictures of everybody. You couldn't. Yeah.
William Brady
Brady.
Thank you.
of the Brady Bunch.
So that's another thing to consider when we look at how Neptune functions. It's also a time when cosmetics made a big shift, whatever you might want to say about that, but it was important enough to put in a book that I was looking at. But I really think the big thing is here how it controls in many ways emulsions, things like that that control photography and other chemical things that need to be studied. That's all I have on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Spencer. That photography began around the time with the discovery of Neptune. Quickly progressed. I'm sure everybody has at some point or another seen some old photographs, or they call the daguerreotypes, from the 1840s, 50s, 60s, early 1800s, and mid to late 1800s, and how stiff and everybody looked. And that was mainly because they had to hold that position for an extended period of time in order for the picture to come out right. Otherwise, it'd be blurry. One of the popular pastimes, or one of the popular photographic subjects of the 1870s and 80s, particularly in the American West, was pictures of bandits, victims of shootouts. You'd see them lined up in coffins, and somebody be taking pictures of them in their coffin. Yeah, it was. Face it, folks. They didn't have Saturday night fights or HBO, so they didn't have a lot of choices for entertainment in those days. Hangings were public events. Yeah, or whatever kind of execution. Unless there were, there was some cowboys that found a cattle rustler and they just hung them up at the point. But yeah, they were. It was a big deal. Okay, so here we are, conjunction of the 21st century. I'm saying it's a conjunction of the 21st century because there are no other major conjunctions this century. By major, I mean significant conjunction with the outer planets, Neptune, Pluto. Saturn, Uranus, Saturn will catch up to Uranus, but I don't think it's going to be as big as this one because it won't be in the sign that the two planets rule. Now, Saturn-Uranus conjunction in Aquarius, that'd be worth talking about. It's exact on April 12th. It's already started. It started a few years ago, in my humble opinion. So some of the significant events, April 12th, 2 days from now, 7:42 a.m. Pacific time. They will be conjunct at 23 Pisces, 59 minutes. Sabian symbol for that degree is an inhabited island. Sounds somewhat pleasant, somewhat innocuous, perhaps. However, if we think about it, does that mean we're going into an isolationist policy? I mean, you got the Western Hemisphere. It's like we're not connected to Europe or Asia geographically, by land. All we can get there is by air or water. Now, they can't march an army across and get to us. So, is that an indication of the possibility of some individuals or groups trying more for an isolationist type of policy from the rest of the world to avoid getting involved in those conflicts? Breaking away from the high dependence on Chinese products, Southeast Asia products. Yeah, that's Southeast. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's see. April 4th, 2011 was when Neptune entered Pisces. He will exit on January 26th of 2026. So he's got almost 4 more years to go in Pisces. So that's going to take him through the November midterm election and the 24th presidential election. This is important because in some ways, to some extent, I think this energy probably began and will really may finally dissipate to some extent with Neptune's entrance into Pisces and when Neptune finally gets out of Pisces. But what it's going to set in motion are things that will continue for a long time. Reason for that is simply that once Neptune made it to Pisces, we knew that this conjunction was coming. We knew it. We weren't thinking about it, maybe, but we knew it was coming. 2011, we have the royal wedding of William and Kate, and Osama bin Laden is found and killed. 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and annexes the Crimean Peninsula. Well, how about that? They made up for the loss in 1856. They do hold grudges for a long time. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 went missing. And their flight 17, which was flying from Amsterdam to, I think, Indonesia or India or someplace, was shot down over the Ukraine. 283 souls on board were killed. Well, 283 people were killed. The souls are still around. And through investigation, the analysis was that if the plane was shot down by a Russian missile fired by Russian separatists in the Crimea, eastern Ukraine. Thank you, Vladimir. Let's see what else we got going here. Okay, 2015, same-sex marriages are legalized. So not acknowledged by everybody. 2016, conservatives win the presidency and the Senate. Global climate change agreement. 2017, global women's rights marches involving over 5 million people around the world. And the Me Too movement kicks into high gear. Enough Harvey Weinsteins. 2019, COVID-19. We have the first photo of a black hole. We have the Epstein scandal involving Prince Andrew. So there's a lot of stuff going on. 2020, more fake news and a stolen election. These are all characteristics of Neptune and Pisces. 2021, we have the insurrection at the US Capitol and an attempt to overturn the 2020 election. 2022, Russia invades the Western Ukraine as we approach 1 million deaths from COVID-19 with 2 new strains, variants on the rise. And here's the chart. So this conjunction occurs, this is a chart for Washington, D.C. Shows it in the 10th house. We have, let's see, Sun 22 Aries 24 Aries. We have Saturn at 20, or not Saturn, but Saturn at 28 Taurus. What else do we have? Got the moon down there at 7 Virgo opposing Mars and Venus in Pisces. Mr. Grenville, if you please, step up and take the microphone, sir.
I want to talk more about what's going on right now.
Yeah, that's where we're at. I'm going to talk about oh, hey there, take your.
The first thing I want to say before I get into my notes is I want to point out that it's my opinion, if you look at the charts, the great eclipse of December 25th, 2019 was an incredible eclipse. If you, I have to have it here to remind everybody, there were 6 planets, if I counted right, in Capricorn. And Jupiter was in Capricorn, and Jupiter is going to go through all of these to Pisces. Now, the reason I pointed out is I think that Jupiter having gone through all the things that conducted Pluto, it went through the whole situation of going through this situation with Uranus, it went through the whole situation of carrying its on through. Now it's going to be into Pisces. It's carrying all this energy that it has. And what it goes on is it's going from a cardinal sign through Pluto, Neptune, I want to think one more thing. What happens to Jupiter after this conjunction? It goes into, this year it's going to go into Aries. Now, Aries is quite a planet. You know, it's a planet of a lot of different things. One of them is also war, but also it is of new beginnings, taking risks, doing things. And I want to talk a lot about that in terms of our personal situation. But I want to first of all just point out what Jupiter brings to the table. It has battered its way through all of these, finally from a cardinal to a cardinal. And I think that this is very significant. The second thing I think is that we have to look at this situation, from my situation, from a mundane situation. Two aspects of mundane situation. The first mundane situation is what we live in right now in terms of the world. Now, we couldn't be in a more difficult time, I think, in our history, because even though we might look at World War II as a big time, but we're looking at two things are going on. We're going through a big crisis in terms of policy, but we're also going into a huge crisis with our climate. Right. 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 That's true. Plastics are a huge issue here. But the point I want to make now is, what are we looking for when we go into, where's my note? When we go to the idea here of what's going on, we have, where have I put this little note, which is really huge. Here it is. Let me just list to you the problems that I have seen coming up here. First of all, we have war. Okay, we have war. It's going on with a really big guy. He has nuclear weapons as his last resort. He has nuclear weapons he wants to try out on the field. He's also embarrassed by his big Russian army not really pulling off what he thought they would do. So he's had this huge embarrassment. This is a guy that doesn't take embarrassment very well. He's already fired, according to what I've heard, several generals. So he's now put in the general that helped him in Syria. So that's something to think about. The next thing I think we ought to think about is the dividedness and the aspect of violence in our country between people. We're in such silos together. And the other thing I think is that there's a lot of real tension building up to what we saw in January 6th that's still here. A lot of people won't talk to each other if they're of another political party. I think that now another, let me just hear this. The pandemic started with the Jupiter thing. And during that time, don't forget one other thing that happened. Saturn conjuncted Pluto. That's the last time that happened was during 1550, 13, I think, or something like that. And remember, this is after Luther started the Reformation. What was the Reformation? The Reformation was one of the hugest problems of war because it was a religious war, and it gave us Protestantism, but Protestantism didn't come without big price. We had a huge price. A lot of people were killed off because they were not Catholics. What? That's true. It was a terrible time. All right, so now we're in the sense of this pandemic, and the pandemic hits us in two ways. One, it isolated everyone again, and we talk about the concept of an island. We've all been isolated and put in this island. How many people say, I haven't seen you for 2 years? 2 years I haven't seen you. That is an island. I mean, like, I was shocked. This is the first time in 2 years that Jim and I have actually been able to come together and teach a class. We're like a little island here ourselves. And the point of it is that this is something that has had a big impact on the whole nation. More high school kids are committing suicide now than any other time in our history. There's a lot more depression. We have athletes who should be great. They say, you know what, I'm kind of depressed. I'm not going to go to the Olympics. It's bothering me. And we all criticize her. You had a contract. You're supposed to go to these Olympics. Well, she says, I can't take the pressure. And more people are being so, look, you've got to come out of the isolation of depression. You've got to start and get involved with what's going on. The next aspect here is inflation. Now, the price of gasoline is only one aspect of this, because everything depends on gas. How do we get our groceries? They're brought in by trucks. What do trucks run on? They run on gas. What's the gas going up? It's going to make everything that's brought to us by trucks is going to go up. What's going to happen to people on fixed incomes who, like myself? Social Security is a very big aspect of what I get by with. I mean, if they took away, I hate to think of what I do. I still keep my apartment, but what would happen? And a lot of people don't even have a fallback on this. They're terrified. That's why we've had this big problem with rent. They're going to keep the rent controlled until 2013. But then what's going to happen? So anyway, I wanted to bring that up. Yeah, May. I don't know. I just read in the paper. Have you read 2013?
Oh, you meant 2023.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. 2023. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. That comes on. But the thing is there right there. All right. The concept of, we just discussed that, but once again, we have a situation where if you read the LA Times, they're now talking about this isn't a climate concern thing. This is a climate crisis. Why don't we call it a crisis? I've been through a lot of droughts here. I've known you have to flush the toilet only in certain circumstances. You can't water the grass in certain circumstances. You can only get water at a restaurant if you ask for it. You have to really watch the way you shower and take a bath.
My neighbors take like 3 showers a day.
Wow, that's real conservatism. So the idea now is also we are in a crisis that has hit a pinnacle here. But now they say if we don't do something immediately, we're already in it. And we all see. Remember the little heat thing we had going on here? That's just an announcement of what the summer's going to be like. That little 2 days of hell we just went through is going to come months and weeks. Last year we had a 2-week situation where everything was above 90 degrees. If you think about it now, every time we have a situation where the crisis of heat is involved, we're seeing an endless amount of records being set. We set records every time. I guess so, some of those temperatures were changing. They used to be 74. Now it's 94, 95. Now it was 101 in Long Beach, new record. So we have that crisis. The next thing we have is the homeless crisis. Now that's a big problem, and it's not getting any better. And I don't know where you live, but if you go by Venice, I live in an area where there aren't too many tents yet, except under the freeway, but they're everywhere, and it's a big problem. And it's not going to get better. And we've had a certain group of people, the mayor and they have all this money. They've got all this money. They've done nothing but the money. It sits around. They haven't really done what they should have done.
Carry your own reusable eating utensils with you.
Thank
Instead
you.
of the plastic, no.
That's good. All right.
And people are very divided right now. There's a huge demonstration in downtown LA with thousands of people.
next thing
So
that-
people are so divided how they believe right now.
The next thing I want to talk about is the cost of housing. The cost of housing now is if you own a house and it's not worth at least $1 million, what kind of house you got? I mean, I live on a street where these old build-up houses from people after the war, these massive, they've all with a little, they now are worth $1 million or $900,000. And if you go in a flip more, it's more. So these are things that are going on. And the final thing I want to point out is gender identity. This whole idea of gender identity has just come to a peak. What are we going to do? In Florida, they now think, well, we're not going to talk about gender identity until they're in the 4th grade. What about a kid that comes and says, you know what? I have 2 mommies. How did you get 2 mommies? Well, I don't know. They're mommies. And everyone, so the point of it is this identity at one level is with parenting. The other is we're learning more and more, and I think you'll talk something about this when you give your talk, about the identity of young kids often know when they're very young, they're different. I don't want to play with the girls. I want to run with the boys. Or I'd rather be with the girls than with the boys because they're interested in arts. So the whole point here is this is the crisis. And I want to now point out that where we are is we step into this crisis. And I would like to know, I myself, now here's the point. Where is this conjunction happening in your chart? Well, I happen to makes a T-square in my chart. You think I'm happy with it? I have had huge crises in my life, which I will not bore you with, but I do have a T-square. And the point of the T-square is Saturn. So what do you think I'm thinking about? And each of you should know where this occurs in your chart and what aspects are to it and see what's going on and see how you feel about it. Now, the next aspect of it is, where is the mundane fit within your chart and how are you dealing with it? Now, the mundane is where you figure out, has things really changed for you? Now, remember, look at this. This thing has, if we go by having an orb, this thing has been going on since we had the whole thing going on with Jupiter passing through the signs. So this is a very complicated way to work at it. So I would say, make a list of all the things in a couple of years here that you've got to struggle with, or you've got to, and let me tell you, the clients that I still have who can afford a reading, because they're not putting all that money in their gas tank, are really upset. This one guy is threatened to lose his business. And I won't go talk. They're having problems surviving. They're having problems in what they have to do. And many people who are independent people, they have problems. So where are you? Now I made a list myself. So in your mind, think of a list that you have to deal with. Has someone been a bad friend? Have you had some accident? Have you had some kind of disease? What have you had happen to you since this happened? Now, the next thing is make a list of what we can do about it. Now, this is where I really recommend one thing. I made a study because I was going to give this talk. I watched 6 different astrologers on YouTube give their checks. Now, one group of people in YouTube, this is a great time. This is going to give you spiritual growth. This is going to give you great intuition. Hang in there and you're going to have a vision of who knows what. This is actually the greatest spiritual time in your life. Well, you know, I just turned those people right off because they're not talking to me at all. However, I do think this. I do think this is a time where, because of the challenges we have, we're being challenged of how strong we are in terms of the way we can use our own intuition, the way we can actually step up and use our meditation, the way we look at mindfulness. The other thing I think is spend some time with the TV off. Don't read. See how quiet it is. Get by yourself. The concept of being an island here is when I turn that TV off, I feel like, oh, what's that? An energy that's pushing all of that mundane astrology, mundane world into your life. Separate yourself from that. Meditate. Develop strategies for keeping yourself strong. And develop strategies, I think, that you have to really be aware of your personal strengths. And if you're really depressed or something like that, you can like actually meditate yourself into it. Really try to share and find someone to share with that will share with you. You know, call Betty up. Betty, I'm depressed as hell. What can I do? And she says, well, you know, and so you spread it out and spread it around. There's still a lot of great people. There's really a lot of great spirituality we can have. There still is a lot of actual growth that we can have by turning into this great beacon that we're having of energy. Now, granted, the energy in the mundane world is kind of spooky, but in our own world, we can grow from this. You grow from challenge. You grow from having a square. You don't grow with a grand triangle. Trust me, I have. However, if you have a T-square with it, that changes the thing. But the point of it is it's out of challenges we have growth. And so the point of my talk is that develop yourself in this time of crisis. Have a piece of time where you are in an island of your own, where you are working on your own personality and your own growth. The other thing I want to really emphasize is have one holy book. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's the Bible or the Quran. Or for me, it's the Upanishads. You have to have some book that you can go back to. And here's a timeless truth. A timeless truth that has been through a lot of problems. The Upanishads have been around for thousands of years. So find somewhere that you can find a philosophy. I recommend another book called Oneness. I forget the author's name, but it's really helpful. So find a book. And that's kind of my Sermon on the Mount here about mundane astrology. And I'll give it back to Jim and they have this discussion.
Oh, thank you for all that.
Oneness, just oneness.
Thank you.
I forget right now. Just look it up. If you look it up in Amazon, Oneness is one of the greatest books. In fact, I've read it.
It is. I have that. It's incredible.
Isn't it great?
Yes, you can open it to anywhere.
Who wrote that book?
Is it channeled? It's like a woman. I think it's some woman. I have
Yeah,
it
it
in
is
the back.
channeled.
I don't
It
have
is.
it with me.
But of all the channeled books, this is one I really find. And she goes through certain things. She says, now you've been here before in this chapter. You've been this much growth. You got to go on this chapter. And it really, we all tried to grow. And we've all gone so far and had setbacks. This woman helps you overcome setbacks.
You can open it anywhere. You know,
Yes.
this stuff.
Like Kelly Powell,
Telling out, that doesn't seem right, but who has the book right in front of them? They have it.
or by Rasha?
It's by Rasha.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, here, I'm gonna.
Oh, thank you for that uplifting speech, Mr. Brindle. All those Greek words. Yes. I will include the Christmas eclipse chart in the PDF handout so you can see that as well. Yeah.
I thought it would be a little ominous before that your listings of the prior conjunctions, there was Justinian plague and the third cholera.
Yeah.
And Jupiter's expansion and Neptune's terms, maybe some doctor told me that the new subvariant is 60% more transmissible, and that may
Yes.
be correlated with this conjunction.
Yes. I think the entire pandemic correlates to the conjunction myself, because it was coming. It was a known thing. It was going to happen. And events start to develop prior to the actual point of exact aspect, and then they continue on after. And well, they may abate to some extent. The basic changes that we have to undergo will stay with us. Yeah, I'm concerned about the two variants that are out there. One that's
But what I'm saying is this conjunction gets closer. That's when the statistic came out that it's the new variant is 60% more transmissible, which
yes,
you could say is a form of Jupiter expansion.
definitely.
Luckily, it's not virulent, otherwise it would be a big problem.
Yeah, but now there's this one is I think they were at first calling it stealth, Omicron stealth, because it until they didn't realize it was there because it was basically so much like the others. But they were then able to start identifying, they start seeing the differences. And so now, yeah, it's more transmissible than Delta. And as such, they are concerned about it. And this is the one that's been raging through Europe. I don't know what's going on in China, other than the fact that they're having, massive, like Shanghai, city of 26 million, they've locked it down, and still the disease is spreading there rapidly. So, and I haven't heard, but it may well be that new variant. Yeah, it's going, it hit Europe, now it's here. And in some areas, where the numbers were going down, now, yeah, so now where they had been going down, the numbers are starting to go back up in some areas. But the other variant that could be even more concerning is the Deltacron, which is a combination. It's somebody was lucky enough to be sick with Delta or with the regular COVID, and then also contracted the Delta variant of COVID. And so now it's a Deltacron. So they had the Omicron, and then they contracted Delta, and so now the offshoot was a Deltacron. And at first they thought it was just a mistake in the testing. I think they were first identified in was it Cyprus, I think, and they thought it was just contaminated test files. But no, they have since established that it is a real thing. So this little bug is smart. I mean, the sole purpose for the virus is survival, and it mutates faster than you can, yeah, it mutates faster than a quick waltz. So yeah, it's fast, and a lot of those, some of the mutations just go and die because they can't really survive. They can't find a host to survive in. But the new variants, yeah, it's more transmissible. So we really don't know. I know Dr. Fauci is saying that we could look forward to a new wave come fall, which is when we get into the influenza season. Yeah.
So
There was the Spanish flu in the early 1918, 1919. And the only reason it's called the Spanish flu is because they were the first ones that were willing to talk about it. Oh, hey, we got this nasty flu over here. But indications are that it may have originated at an army base in Kansas. So. Yes, that's World War I. And somewhere between 20 to 30 million people around the world died from it. Yeah.
So what would you say about the Jupiter Neptune conjunction sextile the nodes?
So where am I going?
Anything?
Which one? Hang on, let me, we got two slides. I want to just throw up here and then we'll get rid of the slides and we can all look at each other.
Okay.
So, okay, let's talk about it. Good, bad, ugly of Jupiter, Neptune, Pisces. What are your thoughts? Our next meetup is going to be on May 8th, which is Mother's Day. We will be here. We'll be talking about Sabian and other degree symbols, what they are and how to use them. Thank you. Link to the Zoom recording for this. If everything worked the way it's supposed to, will be made available shortly, along with the PDF. You got Spencer's email, my emails. There we go. We can stop sharing.
Okay.
Boom, boom. Here we go. Everybody. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Do you see? We're not seeing you yet.
Your comment?
Yeah, I've had my hand up for a while.
Yes. Okay, go for it.
I was just going to chime in and say that, Spencer listed a negative list of societal woes that don't necessarily relate just to the Jupiter Neptune conjunction, but I wanted to tie up a couple of themes together from the 1856 and also the present moment, that there were a lot of really positive spiritualist movement was starting in the 1850s. The abolitionist movement was really inspired by women primarily. England, I think in 1836, correct me if I'm wrong, they came up with the abolition of all slaves. This was then echoed in the United States, the newly forming United States. And there was major spiritualist movement happening simultaneously. What's happening parallel is we're having the Black Lives Matter. We're certainly wanting to have more racial justice, feminine and women's rights, bodily rights, and there's a spiritualist movement happening here simultaneously. I've never seen more yoga in schools, mindfulness movement, international simultaneous meditations, and all kinds of other spirituality that we're seeing in social media, tarot, dream interpretation, etc. So there's so many positive dreams. Images, depth emotions in psychology. People are talking about their feelings and experiences, getting more therapy than they've ever had. There's so much in terms of emotion, spirituality, social justice, rights that are solutions too.
I wanted to say something about when you were talking about the COVID and the number of deaths from the Spanish flu and that kind of thing. The COVID cells actually stay in the body once you're over COVID, especially for long haulers. And we don't really know long haul, what's that going to do to people? I mean, we're not going to know for a long time the outcome of the COVID thing. It's just, we try to avoid it. But on a positive note, that Neptune Jupiter conjunction is conjunct my 10th house North Node, and I retired last June, so there's a lot of good stuff coming out of that too.
Yeah, I'm just getting down here. Yes, the long COVID is that mystery thing that seems to develop 3 to 6 months or maybe a little more after somebody has been infected with COVID. Doesn't seem to relate that much to how severe the infection, the initial illness was. A lot of people are experiencing recurrent respiratory problems, heart problems, and they're seeing some indication of some possible neurological and psychological lasting effects as well.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
yes.
Oh, sorry, was that for me?
For whomever.
That was me, my hand. Okay. So we actually do know what's going to happen or what are likely to happen. The problem is that the focus has been too narrow. I'm saying this not only as a scientist, somebody trained in this sort of thing, and but also somebody who's studied it on my own and lived it. I know what it's like to have a post-virus weirdness that happens. And yeah, it affects your nervous system. But a lot of it affects inflammation, which can be throughout your body. Our largest organ is no longer identified as our skin. It's actually the name's escaping me, but it's the coating that is around every muscle, every organ, everything. So it's like your skin, but on the inside, and it's you can imagine how much surface area that is, and it's innervated with nerves. It's basically, my theory is what acupuncture works on. So when we say we don't know, we do actually have a lot of information out there, and we can collect data and we can do it, but we cannot do it with the restriction of information, the restriction of conversations, the restrictions of freedom of speech, the restrictions of scientists around the world who are talking about this. Very beginning, and this is just a personal coincidence. I want to talk about like what happens, because we know viruses last about 2 to 3 years, right? So astrologically speaking, we can look, what does a 2 to 3 year cycle look like? What planets are we looking at? What are we doing? We know by and large, that's the life cycle. Under normal circumstances, we do not have normal circumstances. But I was diagnosed very early on in my life with fibromyalgia. One of the key markers of fibromyalgia are cytokines. Very, very early on, I don't know if you guys remember this, they were talking about cytokine storms and cytokine this, and the markers for early COVID were that of fibromyalgia. When I got COVID recently, it was the worst fibromyalgia attack first than anything else. Now that was just how my body experienced it. Other people will have it experienced different ways depending on where their susceptibility is in their, not only their genetics, but in their epigenetics. But we do have an idea what we need to consider. What we do have a handle on, what we can make a difference on, is information and education, and not restricting it, not playing to propaganda, not limiting. Because what we saw at the start of this and even before this was a concentrated effort silencing scientists around the world, silencing people with incredible amounts of education and
Absolutely.
and we're more and more and more. Yeah, fine. You're going to have people who are extreme in this way or that way. But the more you try and silence the information, honestly, to me, the more it looks like, what are you trying to cover up? Because it's the bigger effort of the cover up that has my red flags alerted.
Yeah. One of the things that Jupiter and Neptune are involved in is they both, to some extent, rule certain types of writing. And some of that deals just with that simple fact, the scientific element of writing, writing about science articles. Yeah, we've been inundated with fake news and conspiracy theories. Excuse me, I don't mean to offend anybody by saying this, the Bible as science, And yet we can't, as a race, we won't survive that way. The thing that we have to look forward to here in Southern California is that we had those nice rains a couple of weeks ago. Got a lot of green growth out of that. Now we're going to have a long, hot, dry summer. And Katie barred the door, who knows what kind of a fire season we'll have, because it starts early and runs late.
But Jim, I got to talk about religion for a second based on what you said. There was actually concern before this. Science is held up as the new religion. It is no longer science. It is science is the act of questioning and testing and questioning again and trying to figure out what's going on. So when we see fake news and it says, oh, it's fake news, what you have to be more concerned about, I think, is that was a social media campaign. That was a mean girl tactic. Are you guys familiar with like Mean Girls and like girl on girl bullying? That's seen a rise of, but without gender, you know, and science became the new dogma. I believe in science versus I believe in God, meaning I am going to now replace the Pope as, you know, as my prophet, or, you know, in other religions, a different prophet. And I'm now going to choose a specific select number of scientists to speak for me and my new religion. So we have to be really careful in the words we use and what we choose. We have to be really careful in what we call with these terms, because as we do so, as we limit what we want to listen to and what we are allowing other people to listen to, we are limiting our connectiveness. And you know what they say, a house divided against itself, blah, 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 right? That is how you fracture. US's number one export is propaganda. Number one, across the board. And it is something that we continue to do against each other, the infighting, the squabbles, like Spencer was mentioning earlier, people just not talking to each other anymore. Because instead of saying, hey, let's have open conversations, there are sound bites of, well, you're a conspiracy theorist, well, you're, you know, you're this, you're that, back and forth. And so I think, again, as my big Gemini communication thing goes, I think we have to be really careful with the words we use, because words are power. Words
definitely. Yeah, when you look around, we see all this rise in bullying, a lot of which comes off of the through the internet, through Instagram, Twitter and the like, Facebook. It's easy. People, under the guise of freedom of speech, they'll put something out there, and the next thing you know, you've got people believing it. And the problem now is there's like millions of people that, as I prefer to say, are drinking the Kool-Aid and believing a lot of these conspiracy theories that are, siding with taking a more conservative approach to things. And I'll admit to being conservative in some areas, but more liberal in others. But I have a fairly open Virgo mind. Mercury's a Virgo, thank you. And so I try to find an explanation that suits me. And I think what seems to be happening is a lot of people aren't thinking for themselves.
That's right.
Bottom line, they're not willing to open up and listen to alternative ideas. Yeah, and
oh, hey, can you come into the camera frame or so we can see you?
Yeah. You, Jim.
Yeah. Jim, yes, there you are.
Hey,
Hey, can I
Graham.
just chime in with thank you? We'd love to see you. Oh, yeah, and this other folks.
Yes.
Oh,
And Jim, after she's finished, may I talk? This is
Yeah,
Rita,
yeah.
after whoever you gave the mic to.
Oh, I'm just saying that everything's so controlled by everything. All these entities are, I don't know if it's just like, everyone's trying to survive and make money and everything, but It's just like, I liked what somebody said about connectedness. We need to work together and take care of this one earth, you know, like I'm really concerned about plastic and the big plastic companies. All they care about is all the money they make selling plastic packaging to businesses, and they don't really recycle. But recently it's slowly, there's like a new thing that's going to be voted in the fall. It's like a plastic limitation act or something. It's about single-use plastic. But like I carry my own reusable eating utensils with me and my own reusable cups with me. So I don't use, I just keep trying not to use as much plastic as I can anyway. But yeah, it's really, I like that about, we're all interconnected and we have to work together, not against each other. This is so interesting. Thank you.
Okay, Rita?
Okay, so maybe 2 or 3 things. I'm not really, I felt very uncomfortable today because it felt like a soapbox. Everybody's on their own soapbox. And that's what's happening in general. Like, I mean, I really wanted to come to hear about the astrological effects that's going on. So we heard about this whole conjunction and kind of all these disastrous things that happened with this conjunction. But actually, if you look back at all these negative things, out of them came new things. It seems like you go to the dark and then the light comes out. You got to look at, it's a very Jungian kind of conception. You go to the dark and then the light comes out. I mean, after, you know, after all these darknesses, there's light. And I would have liked to have seen that from an astrological.
You're looking for the light?
I'm looking for the light, Jim. Yeah.
Okay.
No, but
Well, here's some light.
I mean, look, you can say, well, this happened, the Civil War, but what came out of the Civil War?
Right.
Okay, what came out of
let's
all
see.
these things? So that must be another
Oh, positives.
astrological
Positive.
aspect
I'm working on it.
follows maybe next month or down the road somewhere, you know?
Well,
Because it's actually Pisces then that has the resolution of these ruptures, I guess you can say.
the thing to keep in mind is there are 2 sides to everything in the universe except rainbows. Because you can only see them from one side.
I love you, Jim. You're so great.
Okay, so yes, there are positive sides to Jupiter and Neptune and Pisces. Pisces I sometimes describe as, you know, you're trying to reach for the divine within yourself or in the universe to connect to it. And where the Aquarian may have 1 foot on the ground, the Pisces has jumped in the air and is trying to fly. No matter how difficult the times are, there will be people who will profit from it, not necessarily from a financial aspect, but simply from a life experience, a life aspect. Some people, you know, you take an aspect, any given aspect, and it can be hard for a lot of people, but it's not hard for other people. It's all about, you know, where are you in your own life and mindset? Okay. Cornelia
That's
brought
not to make,
a
that's not to
handout.
make small the people that are suffering, the poor people that have died in Ukraine, or the people, that's not to make, minimalize that. I'm just talking in
No.
the bigger picture of
Yeah,
humanity.
no, yes. From, you know, you can't have a rainbow without a little rain. You know, after the storm, the air is incredibly clear and crisp, and the smell is remarkable. Used to love the thunderstorms in the Great Plains where I grew up, because you could stand there and watch them coming in, the huge bank of clouds. You can just see the line of them coming, and you'd have the rain, and then it'd go away, and everything, you know, the dust would be out of the air, and everything would just smell so clean and fresh. Until it dried out, and we went around another again. But yes, there's always something positive that comes out of this. You know, we can't, at this point, you know, I don't know what the positive is going to be as far as the war in Ukraine. Sounds like Russia's massing some forces to, you know, invade again, possibly more towards the east, and try to just kind of like nibble away and bite away at it. There are questions that have come up regarding Putin's health. Now, what might he do if he feels that his health is beginning to wane and his days are numbered? Because his goal is to, recreate Russia at its greatest. So all these little countries that came out after the fall of the Iron Curtain from what was Mother Russia, he wants them back, even though they may not be ethnically Russian.
Yeah, but that's his outward goal. His inner
Yeah.
goal is a whole different psychic kind of thing.
I don't know that his inward goal is different from his outward goal.
Well, talk about that.
Yeah, it's how his mind is working it's difficult to say.
Hey, can I jump in? Because I love what Rita had to say about bringing some positive solutions, and also what's happening is indicative of the time. I mean, presently we've got the moon in Leo. Mercury is squaring Pluto today, and we'll have Mercury going into Taurus. So just today as a moment, astrologically, it's a little bumpy. We're in terms of this divisive nature we're seeing as a nation, we're looking at this, Pluto return and also a Uranus return. And with the two eclipses that we just had, there's tons of division like just as a nation, obviously. And then we have this delusion of the Jupiter Neptune together. So many people are simultaneously deluded everywhere. That's a global, geopolitical delusion everywhere. Specifically, this issue of the narrative of Putin's territorial agenda. In Russian, there's a word called pravda. And if you don't know the Russian language, it's very important because that means political truth, which could mean completely lying through your teeth for political gain. And it's normalized by every nation everywhere. And it's something that we don't have in an American language base. So the delusion of truthiness, the delusion of political nationhood, identity, the delusion of ethnicity, the delusion of race, all of these things are on the table for conversation.
One thing I think that many in America don't understand, because we're kind of far removed from it, is some of the ethnic history of our ancestors, where when you go back hundreds of years and you will find, significant conflicts that occurred that seem to be literally have become part of their DNA, because that animosity is still there. It doesn't need to be, but it's a fact that we can't really easily overcome. It's
kind of in their own psyche. It's like you have to go several generations back to understand a person. I mean, the two people that I watch is Ken Burns, and the other person is Louis Gates Jr., who talks about these generations of people coming over and what they're carrying over with them and how it's affecting us nowadays.
Yeah, they're bringing with them the same things our ancestors brought with them when they came over. Ultimately, when you break it down, we're all made of stardust. Okay. Every cell in our body is composed of elements that were created in stars. Every element that makes up a cell was created in a star. And to that extent, we're all cousins. Interesting side note. My wife is a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and the California State organization had their state conference a couple of weeks ago down in Irvine, and we went down there. One of the main genealogical sources that people use to build their family trees, it's called Family Search. It's organized by the LDS, but they have a little app that you can put on your phone, and if you've got a family tree, and it doesn't have to be a huge one, and you sit down and you're with a bunch of other people that have this app on their phone, and you all turn the app on at the same time, it will start looking to see what your connections are. And we're sitting there in the evening and looking, and all of a sudden these 12th and 13th and 15th cousins are popping up. So yeah, we're all connected. We're all related, whether we like it or not.
We found in our genealogy that we were both descended from the same Blanchon family that came from France to escape. They were Huguenots, so they came here to this country. But we're descended from the from the
Oh,
1600s.
Our family trees are,
Hey, Jim, give Cornelia the microphone.
oh. She was talking about how she found that she found somebody who's basically descended from the same Huguenot family as her.
I'm a cousin of Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Yeah.
How about that?
How about them apples? I'm the descendant of King James V of Scotland. Maybe.
See,
Yeah.
that's all these delusions happening.
Yeah. Oh, well. But yeah, there are problems that need to be solved. And the optimistic side is that with this conjunction, we may start to find solutions to some of those problems.
Yeah.
About homelessness and how big a problem that is. Well,
Jim, explain how the conjunction might help that.
When you look at the symbolism of Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces, okay?
Okay,
If you look away from the negative side, sometimes you have to be able to identify the problem clearly before you can solve it.
that's what I was talking about.
We've been talking about the problem with homelessness for a long time.
I just saw a whole thing on a man who bought a huge factory downtown and he's turning it into a place for homeless. They're taking these huge unused factories and they're going to turn them into buildings just for homeless that will have everything in it.
So
Now,
going back to the original, that we're going to have this conjunction, next, in a couple of days, right?
yes, Tuesday
Okay.
morning.
So Tuesday morning, hang on, guys. So then is it Pisces who then finds the balance in there or the humanity in there or the resolution of the opposites? Because that's what we're talking
yeah.
about, the opposites, right?
Mhm.
The hims and the hers and
Right.
I'm right and he's right.
Yeah. It's finding, in some cases, compromise, but from my perspective, the problem that in dealing with homelessness as an example is that the people in power with the money that are supposed to fix the problem have yet to identify it. The problem isn't that we've got 100,000 homeless people in LA. The problem is, why are they homeless?
Right.
Because there's a variety of reasons. Creating a huge factory and making space for them will solve the problem for some of them, but not for everybody.
Right.
I mean, the problem is, why is that person homeless? Why is that family
Why is
homeless at this time?
homelessness happening? Why are people losing their homes? Why are they not able to function at a higher level or whatever level to keep a home
Yeah,
and
part,
feed themselves and a roof over their heads?
and it's like the solution for, it's like crime. Crime is on the rise. We've got all these shootings, freeway shootings. It's almost like you get to a point where you're almost afraid to drive on the freeway anymore because somebody may pull up alongside you and take a shot at you. But this isn't the only place it's happening. It's happening up in Seattle. They've had more shootings already this year than they had all of last year. So you've got the problems are everywhere. I just saw one report where, some of the more conservative Republicans are claiming that, well, it's the blue states that are having the problem with crimes. There's where all the crime is. And yet studies show that red states are just as dangerous. Their crime rates are going up just as high or higher than a lot of the blue states.
People are angry.
Yes, people are angry and have reason to be angry. But we have to, in order to solve some problems, we first have to identify what is that problem. Okay. It's like
Another problem that we've had for a long time.
Humanitarian problem.
And we had this from the very beginning of our country. Why some people came here, because they were tired of being oppressed by the aristocrats. And we still have that problem. Who has all the money? It ain't us.
Right.
the rich are getting, the
Rich and the poor get poor.
rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. That's what happened during the last, when the housing bubble broke.
Yeah.
The rich got richer and the poor got poorer. Yes, for the most part, that's true. There are very few that are, willing to share the wealth, willing to try to make a difference. Yeah, he's doing something to make a difference, and he's going to solve, he's going to provide solutions for, at least some of the homeless, but it's not going to be big enough to hold all the homeless. And it's not going to solve the problem for some of them. Because you got some people that, I mean, regardless of whether, if you provide them with a place to live, they're going to be homeless. They're going to be out on the street.
I heard the symbolism of Neptune and Pisces is drugs and
Yes.
and I read an article a couple years ago, and it was by the head of the New England Journal of Medicine.
Okay.
Very prestigious medical scientific, magazine journal. And she said that she does not trust, she's come to the point, she does not trust any medical information anymore, even though she publishes it, because all the experiments are contaminated by big pharma.
Yeah.
Can you recap that, Jim? We can't hear the.
Yeah, I'll recount.
Couldn't hear.
Yeah,
Thank
go ahead.
Pfizer has been fined billions of dollars for medical fraud.
Yeah.
And it's just not going at all. And the other thing I want to say, a couple things about I used to work at San Monica, and I would read during my lectures this reading magazine called the Jewish Journal. And the article was by this guy who had gone to a Beverly Hills nursing home to give a talk, like for their entertainment. And he had happened to say some negative thing about Putin. And all these ladies there were like, oh, no, don't do anything bad about Putin. We love him. And what I read, I'm not an expert, my impression is, when the Soviet Union fell, everything was owned by the state. And there were Western economic interests, like they were willing to give loans and help, but they had these conditions. And one of the conditions was Russia or the Soviet Union had to switch to capitalism immediately. But like no one owned their apartment or anything. And so everything was sold off to the owners. And like this is my impression. And then the average lifespan age apparently down to like 45 or 56. I mean, it was really, really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then when COVID came, he's a stable person, regardless of what other people think about
Yeah.
him. But people there, he's kind
Oh.
of 86% approval rate, whereas here we got 3%. Well, he was.
Well.
KGB and that much bigger than others. When he was in the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
and now he's in the-
Yeah, I don't remember who was in charge during his tenure there. Yeah.
There's more than one way to look at it.
Oh, definitely. Okay, so
So,
They had big bad Russia, they poor little Ukraine.
right.
There's other ways to get. It's civil war, it's information war. They've been having civil wars since 2014. They want access to the court there.
Yeah.
And ever since they had a civil war, the East leans toward Russia, they speak Russian, they're Russian ethnically, they even have Russian passports.
Yeah.
The Western side is Poland, Germany, the US, and Europe.
Yeah.
And we paid Nazi armband wearing terrorists to overthrow their country in 2014. It was horrible. And there's two sides that
Yeah.
that go away and never knuckled under to the regime. And they've been, the Western side is ethnically cleansing them and killed 14,000 people since 2014. So there's just more ways at once.
Excuse
Oh.
me, Jim?
Yeah, there's always two sides to everything.
Jim?
And yeah, the one question, the things like where we started was big pharmacy and the problem with some of the information that gets put out there. And she was talking about how she was reading a article in the American Medical Journal where the editor said that, she's at a point where she hardly, she doesn't really believe a lot of the stuff that's put out because it is so painted by big pharmacy or other interest groups. I mean,
Jim?
yeah.
there is.
Jim, excuse me for interrupting, but we can't hear the woman that was talking.
Yeah.
If you could go over to her and
hand her the microphone? That would be really helpful for all of us.
Yeah,
at
I'm
home
trying to summarize without butchering what she was saying. First thing she was talking about was the problem with the information that is out there. America is, two of the strongest lobby groups are the American Medical Association and the American Pharmaceutical Association.
Yep.
Okay. We have the best Democratic Congress money can buy. No, bar none. Our Congress is bought and paid for by big business. I don't care which party they belong to. It's bought and paid for by big business.
Absolutely.
You look at, what's his name? Neptune from West Virginia. Claims to be, he's a registered Democrat, but his money, his wealth is tied up in coal, and he has a strong allegiance to coal. And to some extent, I understand that because that has been part of the West Virginia economy for a long time.
Yeah.
To my way of thinking, I understand your representatives, because they represent a smaller district, their function, their scope should be on what's best for my people. Senators, because they represent a state, to some extent, yes, it's what's good for my state, but more importantly, what is good for the country. And there it comes down to your opinion. There's, differing opinions in terms of what is good for the country, what is true and what isn't true. And sometimes it doesn't matter how much evidence you put in their face that something isn't true. They still believe it's true. So yeah, I'm very suspicious of big pharmacies, especially now that they advertise their drugs on television. Hey, if you want this, you might want to talk to your doctor about our new pill. It will do this, this, and this. Oh, and by the way, it may kill you, but don't worry about that.
Right.
They
Absolutely.
downplay the side effects.
Uh-huh. Money.
So, we're in a information overload age, and that's not going to go away. That's part of Aquarius and also part of, I think, Jupiter, the expansion from Jupiter, and the Piscean, now where we're trying to find a stronger religious / spiritual connection, which I think has something to do with the rise of the voice of the religious right, the conservative religious right. It's because it's Pisces, and that's part of Pisces.
So we have the individual problems that have to be solved one by one, homelessness, money, but there's an overall, no, I had it worded better in my head before I got it out here, but there's an overall condition that's happening. Maybe Katrina can help me with this one because I see her smiling at me. I think she knows where I'm coming from. It's like, yes, we have to get down to the nitty gritty. Homelessness, money, coal stuff, but there's an overall, that part of my psyche that works that way. I don't know if it's the Virgo part or whatever, that sees that years ago it might be a different problem, but there was got to be an overall problem that is kind of at the root of humanity. Kind of what are we looking at that makes people polar opposites, that makes people fight each other, that makes people,
I know the answer. You want the answer?
There was a great quote by who was it? Now we're going to go to that crazy Academy Awards there where Will Smith went, but the quote was by who was the other Black actors? He said, "Just when you're at your top, watch out for the devil who'll pull you down." But there seems to be the
Denzel Washington.
the light in the dark. Seems to be the light in the dark.
Right.
What you're talking about, Rita, is like the spiritual, what is the value system of like justice? What do humans really value? Why in Pisces do we pull? We are the two fishes tied to each other's tails, pulling in opposite directions. And it's that kind of frictive value is the value for ourselves and our, our egoic needs of our hungry appetites, or is it to value the ecosphere, our humanity, our creativity as humans?
Or is it just that there's always a polar opposite?
That's where we
stay
are.
together by magnets and
Okay.
polar opposites. So maybe there's something in the psyche or in the universe, in those
Yes.
stardust particles.
Okay.
that are
So here's my thought in terms of what the root of the problems are.
Okay.
The
Give it
root
to
of the
us.
problem is humanity.
Yes.
Ultimately, humans, we're the problem.
Yeah.
Okay? The problem, we're a problem because in many cases, we're not behaving in a very human conscious way.
Yep.
Okay. We're all different. We're all unique. And that makes it, difficult for us to sometimes see what or understand what the other person is saying. Okay. More than one occasion, my wife and I have had some communication issues because she's a Pisces with Mercury at 29 Aquarius, and I'm a Virgo with Mercury at 0 Virgo. Okay, that's an out of sign opposition. We're opposite. It can get a little dusty at times, but being the mutable one, I'm better at acquiescing and listening. But yeah, but that's the thing is we have to understand that we're all different and try to find ways to work through those differences. But I think one of the reasons, the rise of the conservative Christian element comes from them being, in some ways, feeling threatened.
Yes, they're
by everything else.
afraid.
They're afraid, and so that's where they're getting their strength from. Consider what happened with the questioning of the Supreme Court nominee Jackson, where they were, the two of them, a couple of them were asking her, well, what's a woman? Give me a flipping break.
So if we go back to science
Yeah.
and we
No.
look at it from a psychological or physiological,
No, it's in the Bible. Rita, were you not paying attention? It's in the Bible. You were created from my rib. You follow
Jim,
one
yes,
step
Jim.
behind. You do
Okay.
what I say.
But let's go back to the monkeys. So let's go back to the animals, okay? So the medulla oblongata, which is back here, which we all have as infants.
I love it.
It's
I
the
think some
fight or
people might be
flight-
missing it.
It's the fight or flight system. So of course, the giraffes are going to stay together because they don't want to get eaten by the lions. It's a basic kind of biological thing. And it's only by connecting to the more rational and the more
Yeah.
other spiritual feeling parts that we start to grow and see other points of view.
So, but there is positive out there, but it's for us to find, the joy and positive within our lives and to reinforce that, not the negative. When you, okay, Cornelia wants to say something later.
Sure.
And I've got a story.
I just gonna say that as far as I'm concerned, this conjunction is here to teach us something. We won't know until it's over, but I think it's part of the preparation of going into the new Aquarian age.
Yeah.
We're going to have to make a choice. And so I have put up Neptune and Jupiter, and I put a little altar in front of them, and I prayed for the water spirit to forgive us for what we're doing to the water and bring it back to us. So there's so many problems that we've had for so long, but so many of them have been brought to the surface, which to me means that they are going to be dealt with because they have to be dealt with before we get into the Aquarian age. So I think under this transit, we're going to have to make a choice. And like Jim says, you can focus on the positive or you can focus on the negative. And I put a sign up over my desk that says, be the light you want to see in the universe. And that's what I'm going to concentrate on every day. And hopefully we'll see some good changes.
Okay, and I just wanted to read something from the Mountain Astrologer that seemed very hopeful, more hopeful to me regarding this. It's not very long, just very short. Both Jupiter and Neptune are in their domicile in Pisces, closely sextile the North Node in Taurus and trine the South Node in Scorpio. This sets up a tone that ripples throughout the conjunction, the mutable softening the fixed strengthening the mutable. These aspects hold the power to bless and inspire our collective trajectory, bringing luck and creativity to how we approach our goals and the flexibility to flow around any obstacles in our path. Drawing on the dark depths of our past, we define our values toward us anew and learn joyfully to sail towards stabler shores. Makes sense.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, the story I was going to tell, it's the old Native American story about the grandfather and the young boy, and the boy is conflicted, and grandfather is talking to him and says, well, the way I look at it, I have these two wolves inside of me. One is dark and one is light, and they're constantly fighting. And the boy says, well, which one wins, grandfather? And he said, the one I feed the most. Feed the light wins. Feed the dark wins. It's that simple.
Right.
Let's see, was there something else I wanted to say? Spencer, any parting words of wisdom?
For those that think I may have been overwhelmed by the negative, I'd like to point out one thing, that now in this country, women have the vote. Now in this country, slavery's been abolished. Now in this country, there are civil rights issues. Now in this country, we have many, many people who are educated. You can't say that we haven't been going somewhere in a positive way, but every way along that way can be, which one are we going to feed and why? And that's what I was involved with. Which one are we going to feed and why?
The one thing we didn't mention really in all of this is the United States Jupiter return, or Pluto return, I mean. We've had one Pluto return. We've got two more coming up, one in July and then one in December. And I think those are that's also part of this whole dynamic that's going on. Because nothing acts alone. So yeah, we focused on the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, but all these other things that we've talked about are going on at the same time.
Yep.
And they're going on within each of us individually in some way.
Yep.
And I lost my other thought. Shoot, let me go back over here where it was. Maybe I'll find it again.
I have a thought. This
yes.
idea of the pravda, of the political truth of the moment, ties in not just to with the Russian narrative of the Putin regime, but Viktor Orban's Hungary as a Christian nation, and I think, or if we say any fundamentalist religion that is hypocritical at best, and I think if we're able to name and articulate and unravel that pravda, that political untruthiness, that's really key in shifting these changes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I got the thought back and I'm trying to hold it there. One thing I personally feel is that most people who haunt their Christianity and call themselves Christians are not very Christ-like.
Mm-hmm. This is
okay. They forgot, supposedly where this came from. They forgot that. I mean, because you look at what happens. Okay, yes, women have the right to vote. We have the right to, the issue of right. There's a question of right to life, and we had dealt with all these, even just simple voting rights. And you look at all the states now that are trying to take away. They say they're not trying to take away voting rights. They're trying to ensure the sanctity of the election process. Well, it's been proven over and over again that it's safe, people. Nobody stole anything from anybody. Well, not the election, at least, though he may have stolen things from other people. But, just yesterday I saw where a woman in Texas was arrested and is being charged with murder because she was pregnant and supposedly tried to induce an abortion, to abort the baby. She had some complications and had to go to the hospital, and she was reported. The baby was aborted and lost. And so she's being charged with murder.
We're right back to the 60s.
And there are a number of states that are taking that right away from women. It used to be pretty straightforward. If you got pregnant as a result of rape or incest, an abortion was an available option. They're taking that away from women. So, and these are the Christian right, because it's the men, for the most part, making that kind of a decision, because the women are came from Adam's rib. Of course, they forgot about they never talk about Adam's first wife, and I don't understand that. They only talk about the second one that came along, his second wife, you know. He never divorced the first one, so I'm sorry, that was an illegal marriage. Yes. Okay, I didn't even know what time it is.
Cornelia's genius, and I love what Cornelia had to say about, keeping our vision forward.
Yeah.
and positive. And I also, that's why I keep a lot of my
Yeah.
sun,
Yeah.
moon, ascendant private, because a lot of people project only and look at the shadow of any sign, any aspect, any transit. And we have the capacity to use the inherent power in those signs, aspects, and transits for the betterment of the moment.
Yeah.
And the future.
I knew you had strong Sag somewhere, some Sag.
Yeah, it's ultimately, it is up to each of us individually to make this change and, to make the difference in our own lives. And collectively to try to direct society in a more positive, rewarding, fruitful direction, because the reality is, there's 7.7 billion of us, and there's only one Earth. So, the Earth will survive without humans. Humans cannot survive without the Earth. And sorry, we don't have the ability, and we will not have the ability to go to the stars and find some other habitable planet in time if we don't do something now. So,
And
but then again,
if we're too divided, that's a lot harder to do.
yeah. Yeah, see, there's one part of me that likes these apocalyptic movies and stories, so I'm kind of looking forward to some of them. But unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get a zombie apocalypse, so it'll be something much more devastating. Okay, anybody got last thoughts, last comments, last questions? Let's see, we're pushing, what time we're going? Oh, 2:25, how about that?
I'm going to
It's not late, it's not as late as I thought.
a compliment, because Katrina said she doesn't like to give away her sign because, people will project on it. Well, being a Virgo, they used to project all that stuff about Virgos. But over the years, I realized it has so many good qualities, and I'm really proud of being a Virgo. And I want to say that Jim exhibits and has and manifests all the positive signs of a Virgo.
Yes.
So I want to applaud Jim.
Well, Libra too, all that Libra.
Oh, yeah.
I consider myself an optimistic pessimist. I consider the worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that could happen? And when it doesn't happen, it's like, hey, that's okay.
Yes, but you really care about people. It's the Virgo part that is usually missed when they make negative comments about Virgos. And it's us trying to make it work for everybody and care about people.
Yeah. Kelly, you look like you want to say something, or are you just absorbing everything?
Yes, Kelly. Yes,
You're Kelly. Oh.
You're muted, babe.
Yeah, you, Kelly.
She's muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. She was listening to some music.
Oh, no, I'm listening. One of the things that I wanted to say when you were talking about the people that flaunt their Christianity is that if you ever read A Course in Miracles, they are called the unhealed healer. And I think that's a great term, because people are trying to do this thing, but they're not really healed themselves. So anyway, that was one thought that I had.
Wow.
Good thought. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to thank all of you for joining us and for sticking with us.
Thank you.
Barring a natural disaster or a repeat pandemic, we'll be back here the second Sunday in May.
Yay.
Right.
And
Thanks, Rita.
all technical problems will be resolved. We'll be and we're looking at the Sabians and other degree symbols and how you can utilize them to add another layer of meaning, perhaps, to some things. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Till then, stay well, stay safe. Got a Mars weather course coming up. Don't take chances. Be cool. All righty.
Fast driving.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.